Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Miller Time. I'm State Representative Tim Miller here in Minnesota, and each Monday night at 7 o'clock, I come to you and we're going to discuss issues that are important to the state of Minnesota in my district. I serve District 17A, which if you live in Minnesota, is about 110 miles west. My hometown is 110 miles west of the Twin Cities, and I serve Swift, Chippewa, most of Renville County, and 4 townships in Kansas County. If you're not from Minnesota, just think western Minnesota, not quite to the South Dakota border, but what we call west central Minnesota. I'm really excited to be here with you tonight. There's a couple real important issues coming up in the state legislature this week on the House floor that I plan to discuss. But before we get to that, a couple things. Number one, if you want to get notices of when to watch this, you can subscribe to my page. That'd be the easiest way to do that. I do post through my house email. I send out an update every week, and I'll have a link there typically. Or you can just come to YouTube Live and find it. I put it on Facebook as well. But if you subscribe, that certainly is a more efficient way, because then you can set yourself a reminder to turn this on at 7 o'clock. I hope to be here every Monday night at 7 o'clock. I can't promise. There may be things that come up, House floor, things like that. I'll try and message that out. It's sometimes a little bit problematic. Technology is great, but at this point, it isn't quite so perfect yet. And speaking of perfect, we're keeping things, as you can see. I have just a simple background right now, and it's just me talking to you. Hopefully next week I'm going to ramp it up a little bit. I'm going to bring in State Representative Jeff Backer. He's my roommate here in St. Paul, and I'm going to bring him in for a discussion. And if we get real fancy, maybe we'll have a second camera for him. We'll see if we can do that. You can, of course, chat with me at any time if you look over here. That's the way I want to be able to communicate with you. If you can see, I did already put up, if you want to communicate with me throughout the week, you can email me at rep.tim.miller@house.mn. That's my legislative email address, and it's up there on the chat. Or you can call my office at 651-296-4228. I'd love to hear from you through this chat or through those messages or those means. Yeetmeister, thank you very much for posting this. I have a copy, I believe, by Yeetmeister himself. They have a copy of Anthem by Ayn Rand, and I'll tell you what, promise that I'll look at that copy that you gave me this week, and I'll do my best to get it totally read. Then I suppose you want to have a conversation with that. One reminder before we really get rolling here is that the focus of this show are issues that are important to my district and the state of Minnesota. We're in session right now. We started a couple weeks ago, and we're going to primarily focus on issues as they come up in the legislature. There is some legislation that I am advancing. I have a big one that I'll be talking about next week, a way to hold the agencies accountable to the money that they spend in the state of Minnesota. But there's going to be plenty going on in the legislature this year. We can probably talk about those issues. I do want to hear from you what issues you want to talk about, but I'm not going to go to national issues unless they specifically pertain to my district. So we're going to roll right into it with the first of two subjects. And here in Minnesota, we of course have tomorrow night, we have statewide caucuses in the Republican and Democrat Party. I think some of the other parties have caucuses as well. We're a caucus state. So for anyone that doesn't know that, it's as alternative to a primary state. So we get into a room and we can vote with our own bodies, saying who we stand for or who we support. And it's a process by which you become a delegate there to county convention, endorsing convention, state, national conventions, on and on and on. It's kind of a lengthy process. It can be kind of cumbersome. Caucus systems can be sort of frustrating at times. I think they're wonderful. I think they're kind of a messy art. But what I love most is it's a chance for everyone, you the citizen, to go and say what's important for you, for your government in the coming election and the years to come. It's a wonderful process. Primaries are much more efficient when it comes to counting numbers, whether it be for candidate nominees and things like that. Certainly a much cleaner method, but I think you kind of lose that layer of people voicing their opinions. So I do like it this way. So a week from tomorrow, we have sort of a first time ever, not sort of, it is a first time ever. We're going to have a presidential primary. Now, I want to describe what it is, kind of what it isn't very briefly, and then there's some issues that have risen up that I want to address with that primarily. But first of all, in the state of Minnesota, not to be confused, we have the caucus system in the spring, but yet after the endorsing process, so like I've been endorsed by the Republican Party each of the last years that I've run, and I'm going to be seeking that endorsement again. I am running again this year. After that, someone can still file to run against you in your own party. So if there's multiple candidates, there's a primary in August. It's typically about August 10th. It's about kind of the second Tuesday of the month typically. It's right around in that area. And that's when you have a primary where you go into a precinct and you vote for your person, and the person with most votes gets it. That's the official candidate heading into the general election. What happens with the caucus system oftentimes is the person that's endorsed in the spring, no one else runs against them. Certainly in the Republican Party, that happens most of the time. In the Democrat Party, a little bit less, but that's kind of the way that it is. So next week's presidential primary is a little bit different than that in a couple ways. First of all, we've never had a presidential primary to identify who the Republicans and who the Democrats want to present as their candidate, at least from the Minnesota level. We've done the caucus system, and there's been a straw poll at caucus that's determined. There's been a process after that, but that basically determines who your nominee is. 4 years ago out of Minnesota, we had 3 different candidates that got some delegates. Won't go into who it was right now because that's not germane to now, but there were 3. This year it's going to be President Trump, and that's it, regardless. So, but with the primary, people are going to actually go into one of their precincts like they do in the fall or in the general election in November, and they vote for who they believe, should be the next president, as opposed to that straw poll. So that's what we're going to be doing this year. And really that came out of 4 years ago. There was an amazing thing that happened on the Republican side. The caucuses where these straw polls were happening, in my hometown of Princeburg, the caucus might have as little as 5 or 6 people in a certain year. It might have as many as a dozen people. Very small town, very small caucus night. 4 years ago, we had about 40 people there. I can tell you the town nearby me, Wilmer, where most of the Kansas County precincts go, they will typically on a very busy year have maybe 90 to 100 people showing up for caucus. 4 years ago, they had almost 300. So, Meister, thanks for that question. I'll have to read that in a second and get to that in a second. It's kind of a lengthy question. I want to make sure that I understand it properly, and then I'll answer it. So hold on to that question, and I'll answer it here in a little bit. So anyway, because of this, the straw poll kind of got mangled, muddled. I didn't have a problem with that, but a lot of party officials do, and so they proposed for president only doing a primary. Now, that might be digestible and understandable. I do believe that there are people who really want us to be a primary state because, again, it's more efficient, more organized. The candidates, there's more power in that than a caucus system, much less complicated. I think they want to move us towards a primary state, and in my opinion, this is the first step. But they had a valid argument about identifying the right person for presidential. So in elections law, that was passed. Now, there was something that was brought with that frankly I was lied to about. And I hate to say that, but when we discussed this, one of the questions was as well, they had mentioned that people are going to have to determine their party affiliation. Now understand that follow me, in the fall primary, the one that we normally have, when you walk in, you have a ballot, and you can only vote either for Republicans or for Democrats on that primary ballot. But you have all the Republicans on one side, you have all the Democrats on the other side of the same ballot. And you just go to a booth and you can only color in one side or you mess up that ballot. So you are choosing one party or the other, but no one knows it. Well, what they did for this primary is they required that when you go to the polling place, that you state, I am a Republican, and they record that and give you a ballot, or I am a Democrat, they record that and give you that ballot. Well, this is data. This is information about you that's on there. They don't have any other information, not your Social Security, home address that they forward on or anything like that, not privacy things, but how you decided which way you're going to vote. And there are people that are concerned about this. There's people that are flat out upset about this. There are people who said that they are not going to even vote in the primary on this because of that. And frankly, I don't blame them. So there's been some legislation that's come forward. I'm an author on one that basically says the data that's collected this year is going to be destroyed, and then we're not going to collect any data in the future. There's a bill that's coming by Democrat Ray Dean that's coming onto the House floor Wednesday night, and this long diatribe is to get you there, so I hope you're following me. Just wanted to give you some background. But he's presenting a bill that's a little bit more complicated, but essentially what his bill does is after you vote, that information only gets sent to the national party leader, so the RNC and the Republican or DNC with the Democrats, and they use that to validate who the presidential candidate is going to be for that year. But understand in his bill that data is still going to be collected and stored. And we're going to continue having these primaries. The bill that I authored, that I joined with Representative Peggy Scott, is a little bit more direct and simple. What it does is basically any information that comes from this primary is just destroyed, and there's no data that's collected in the future. However, there's one step beyond that. Representative Jeremy Munson is talking about, he may or may not, I don't know for sure yet, but he may be presenting an amendment which would basically say we're not going to have a primary. We're going to stick with caucuses, and that's actually a valid conversation that we need to have. Again, I think that the caucus system is beautiful in its messiness, but I think that it's important, and I think we just need to get rid of this primary as a whole. But what's important to all of you is that data should not be collected and it should not be disseminated by people. Now, why would people want that data? Well, there's a couple reasons. First of all, if we have good data on how people vote Republican or Democrat, guess what? When I run for office next time, I know exactly who the Republicans are and who the Democrats are, and I know where to collect my votes and where not to collect my votes. Quite simple. We also have redistricting coming up in 2 years. That information could be used for that redistricting. So I believe that an election needs to be where the citizens of Minnesota, in this case, hold their elected officials accountable, and other candidates have an opportunity to run and people can vote for them free of government intrusion. This is kind of government intrusion here, and so I don't support it. So that is going to be discussed on Wednesday evening. The Ray Dean bill is going to be put into the House, and kind of the way the system works in the House of Representatives, if they calendared a bill like that, the Democrats have enough votes to get it passed off the floor. It's going to be passed off of the floor. Now it will go over to the Senate at that point, and I'm only going to touch on this briefly so you know what's going to happen there. Senator Mary Kiffmeyer is the chair of the committee that deals with elections, and she has said, we're not going to try and improve this law, which is what the Ray Dean bill attempts to do, to get rid of the data, and we're just going to get rid of everything here in the future. So I don't see that this bill is going to get any farther than the House, but I do believe that this bill, he's a Democrat, and to a degree, I agree with him. I don't agree on everything on his bill, but I agree at the intent of what he's trying to do. He's trying to say you can't use this against voters. You can't use it in that way, and I fully support that. So stay tuned. If you're going to vote in the primaries, and I encourage you to be involved, so therefore vote in the primary a week from tomorrow. But if you vote, your information is going to be collected. I was told that the Secretary of State is going to hold off for 60 days with that information before he sends it on, to wait and see what happens in the legislature, to wait and see if there's any lawsuits or things like that, which I think you can anticipate that happening. So Yeetmeister, since this question has to do with this, I'm gonna say, so this primary business is okay to reverse ASAP, but we can't reverse intolerable acts because we can't be wishy-washy. I'm not sure what intolerable acts you're talking about, so maybe if you can clarify on that. I think the reason why we want this primary thing reversed is just that it's a bad data thing, and there are certain issues that have to be done with immediacy. But if you can explain intolerable acts, let me know, clarifying that. While I have you on here, I'm going to answer your other question, then I'm going to move on to my other subject. It says, what kind of challenges would there be to making laws requiring police and sheriffs to reside in their jurisdiction? Police aren't required to be in their jurisdiction. I'm pretty sure that sheriffs are. Sheriff's deputies maybe is what you mean. That might be a little bit less clear. I don't know if you have to be in, I don't think you have to be if you're a sheriff deputy, but if you're a sheriff, you're an elected position, you have to reside in that community. So the challenges that you would have is I don't necessarily have a problem with a police officer living in one town and working in another, especially if you get in higher populated areas. I don't think it's necessary for them necessarily to reside there. So the biggest challenge would be is I don't know how much interest there would be in the legislature or in the governor's office to sign into law something like that. If you want to give me a comment on kind of your reasoning behind that, I can maybe address it a little bit further when we have a couple minutes at the end of the show. But what I'd like to do right now is move away from this presidential primary, and we're going to get into a rather completely different subject. But this is what's calendared, as we call it, on Wednesday night in the Minnesota House of Representatives. The first bill we're going to take up is the presidential primary bill, and then the second bill that we're going to take up is what's referred to as an emergency insulin bill or an insulin for all bill. It's called a couple different things, but it basically has to do with insulin. So here's what is happening, and then I'll explain the bill, and we'll kind of break it down in the remaining minutes here. I didn't say this in the beginning of this show, but I'd like to keep this show to about 30 minutes. I think that's more than enough time. If you want me to dive deeper into a subject in the future, please let me know, and we can certainly do that. As I incorporate some of the more fancy things with other cameras and bringing bills up on the screen and stuff like that, keeping it interesting, maybe watching a little bit of video, we might be able to extend the length of that program. Anyway, okay, I see your response. I'll answer that at the end, I promise. But getting back to the insulin, what's happening, if you're diabetic or you know someone that's diabetic, you know exactly what's happening. In the last year, it's probably been climbing a little bit before that, but in the last year, the cost of insulin has skyrocketed. And private insurance, some of the deductibles have made it so that you're paying a ton of money. In other cases, your co-pays and such is just making it cost prohibitive. So last year, there was at the very end of session a bill. It never really went that far, but there was a bill that tried to take a swipe at this. And what happened is there's people that are have the means, are wealthy enough that they can pay for the insulin, and then there's people in the lower end of the spectrum that are on medical assistance, public aid, and that's being paid for through that. So there's kind of this middle group that was kind of falling through the cracks. And so what they proposed last year was a tax on all insulin to fund the middle of that, and that was about a $10-12 million cost. So think of it as increasing taxes by $10 or $12 million. That didn't go anywhere. That was problematic for many different reasons, which, by the way, this whole insulin thing is very complex. And I'm sure all of you are smart enough to understand it, but it gets so deep into the weeds. I'm going to try and just keep it at just kind of the level that I can say this is what you need to remember coming out of this. So that bill last year was very problematic. I don't think you tax something in order to make it affordable. That doesn't make any sense. That kind of died off. So Wednesday night there's going to be a bill. It's called the Emergency Insulin Relief Bill. I don't know if it really just is emergencies. I don't know how much relief it's going to be, but I certainly have some concerns. What it basically does is that anyone that is paying more than $30 a month for insulin, it's going to pay for that insulin. And I can tell you that basically covers pretty much everyone. Everyone that is receiving insulin at this time will be affected by this. This bill only requires a $30 copay for anyone receiving insulin. If that's all you pay if you have insulin, that's great, right? You're saving lots of money there. But the bills have to be paid, right? And that's where the difficulty is. So how is that paid? Well, it's kind of a complicated system that I almost would need a chart behind me to kind of point to, and I don't have my chart yet, maybe in the future. But essentially what they're doing is they are taking the cost of everyone's insulin and dividing it among the manufacturers. And the way that they're dividing it among the manufacturers, long story short, provides an incentive for the prices to be expensive, not less expensive, because the way the formula works, if your insulin is less expensive, you have to pay back on a median amount, on an average amount. So you're going to be paying back into the system if you're an insulin producer at a rate higher than what you're selling it for, so you're going to lose money. Well, if you're selling it at a higher rate and reimbursing at a lower rate, you're going to be making money off of it. So the incentive is to be more expensive. That's the biggest problem with insulin, and that's the one thing that this bill is not addressing. This bill is not going to address the sheer cost of insulin. Okay, as a matter of fact, I believe that it's going to drive up the cost. Here's another problem that it's going to do. Like I said, reason number one is that it's pretty much going to cover everybody, even though we're saying that it's emergency relief for only those that need it. It's going to cover everybody. And number two, it's not going to drive down costs. It's going to drive up costs. Now, to the individual, you may not see that cost, but that bill has to get paid somewhere. And that's just going to feed into the whole system. There's also issues about you can't spread this cost of insulin to other states. That's against the Commerce Clause. So like as the costs go up here, you can't feed it over to Wisconsin, for example. So we're guaranteed to be the most expensive in Minnesota if this were to, because we can't send it anywhere else. They can't spread it out. That's a problem. The third problem, and this is the biggest problem that I see, okay? So what the premise of this whole bill is insulin's expensive. Some people can't receive it, and that's bad. That's not good, okay? But they can't receive the insulin. But so we are going to cover the cost of it so they can receive it because it's life-saving medicine. If you're not taking insulin and you're diabetic, you're not going to live. You have to have that insulin, okay? So we do this for insulin. But then what happens about heart medications that people need that are expensive, okay? What happens to chemotherapy, which is really, really expensive, okay? All these other different medications that can come to your mind, you may have to have some of them to keep you alive. What happens when they're too expensive, okay? Are we going to do this on every single item, and how are we going to pay for all that? Because again, someone has to pay the bills, okay? And remember, again, this is not going to drive down costs. This is only going to drive up costs for insulin. So all these other medications, if you were to start attaching the same model to all those others, costs are just going to drive up. In my opinion, this is socialized medicine. This is kind of a roundabout way of doing that. It's kind of a piecemeal, one at a time, driving us towards socialized medicine, and I can't support it. There are ways that we can impress upon manufacturers that they better do something about this problem, or where government's going to get involved, and they don't want to. They can bring this down. These skyrocketing prices have to do with price gouging and record profits and other things that there's no mechanisms in place to discourage that. There's things that we can do. We can bring in different types of competition. There's things that we can bring to the table policy-wise that would hold them accountable and drive down these costs. There's I mentioned Jeremy Munson in the beginning of the show. He did a rather famous video, or notorious video, I should say, a couple months ago. He went into a Walmart and bought vials of insulin for $25 a bottle, and it incensed everyone, saying that's not the same thing. And I won't get into that argument. I'm not going to defend Jeremy. I'm not going to argue against it. I don't want to go into all of that, okay? But what I will tell you is that the difference between the super expensive insulin and the very inexpensive is very, very little difference, okay? I'm not saying you should use the inexpensive one because there is a difference, okay? But my point being is it shouldn't cost that much. The reason why it costs that much is because the way in which they're presenting this insulin to people, the process that they have, the machine that it injects it into and stuff, that's where all the cost is involved. That's where their profits are being made, okay? We should not have, when insulin is fundamentally very little differences between the different types of insulin, we should not have this huge swing in costs. We need to focus on driving down the costs of healthcare, driving down the real costs. You drive down the costs and the consumer pays less, insurance is more stabilized, all this stuff. And one of the frustrations I have is that government doesn't seem to want to do that stuff. They just want to throw more money onto a problem and somehow that's going to fix it. So this insulin thing is a lot more complex than that. You can watch, by the way, these bills, if you go to Minnesota House of Representatives, I don't know if I can I'll see if I can post the link really quick as we're talking here. But you can watch hearings, okay? Here we go. Give me a second here. Okay, nothing is going to be, there is some, I think there's some committee that's on right now. Okay, you go to the main web page of the Minnesota House of Representatives, and on the right side column, you'll see House TV 1 and House TV 2, okay? And here's the link to one. This is where it'll be. You can watch these bills discussed. Here you go right there. You can click on that Wednesday night, probably about 6 o'clock we'll get started up, and you can actually watch the debate on these bills. And I encourage you to do it. It can be a little dry at times, but anyone that watches it really learns a lot, and they come back and kind of say, I'm glad I watched it. You can have it off in the background, so when it gets a little bit boring or a little bit long in the tooth, you can go to something else. But this is your House of Representatives, and we answer to you. I will answer to you, answer your questions. I'll defend your position. But the more informed that you can be by watching the Minnesota House of Representatives, for example, the better off all of us are. So Yeatmeister has been asking a couple questions, and as we're getting close to wrapping up, I want to address that, and then we'll probably wrap things up for the evening. So going back to his original question, it said, so this primary business is okay to reverse ASAP, but we can't reverse intolerable acts because we can't be wishy-washy. And he says, stuff like gun laws, marriage, etc., that get done in a Dem-controlled legislature, but not undone in a Republican-controlled legislature. I understand where you're going, and I understand your frustration with that. But I understand in a Dem legislature or a Republican, Democrat or a Republican legislature, our system of government is designed to move deliberately and slowly and actually rather difficultly. So, for example, like gun laws, the Democrats, they have a Democrat governor and a Democrat House, and we only have a two-person Republican majority in Senate. And in this case, Democrats fundamentally pretty much support gun control laws. The Republicans pretty much don't. And that's one issue where it's pretty much divided right down the aisle. Okay? With all that, they can't get any of these gun laws passed. Now, the flip side is that if there is something that's in law, the reverse has to happen also. You have to get a House, Senate, conference committee report, which is basically the bill's the exact same in the House and Senate. They vote for it, it goes off the floor, and it's signed by the governor. We have a divided government. We have a Democrat majority House, a Republican majority Senate, and a Democrat governor. And a lot of these things just simply aren't getting signed into law. Now, what you do see, and this is a fair, what you do see sometimes, it's very unfortunate, is kind of the slippery slope argument. The progressive movement is very effective in Minnesota in progressing its legislation along. So if they can't get a 10 out of 10, at least they get a 1 out of 10. And then over the next 10 years, they get one more each time, and then they end up 10 years later with their 10 out of 10. That has a lot to do with courage. And I fully admit that there are many people in the legislature that are more concerned about their position in the legislature than they are standing on things that are right. Now, in fairness to some, they don't necessarily agree with all of this stuff either, even in the Republican Party. Okay, there are, on this insulin bill tomorrow night, there's going to be Republican votes for this, even though I believe it's a flat-out socialist program. How do I know? Because there's people publicly saying they're going to support it. But here's an important thing too, okay? We have Republican and Democrat, two major parties primarily. The Libertarians are growing in number. You have Independent Party. You have all these different groups, but primarily it's Republican, Democrat. I think people can agree on that. But people should be happy to know that I am part of the Republican Party, but as a state representative, I represent the people of my district. Now, I represent the people of my district with my fundamental morals, values that hopefully reflect that district, which they must because I was elected, okay? But I am not going to do something because it's the Republican thing. I'm not going to do something because it's the conservative thing. I'm going to do what I do because I believe it's the right thing to do, all things considered. My principles, my district, the state of Minnesota, the specific bill at hand, all this goes into the formula, if you will, to derive a decision. And it's up for the voters in the next election to decide whether that's what reflects them or not. And that's how we move with that. So I want to read on from Eatmeister, and then we're going to wrap up here shortly. Leos, the idea being they are part of the community, neighbors instead of outsiders. I figure it can make relations with them to be more civil and less shooty. I'm going to reread the thing before that because you kind of... threw me here, Eatmeister. Can you clarify a little bit more? Okay, so his primary business is going to reverse and tell rocks because we can't be wishy-washy. Stuff like gun laws, marriage, etc. that get done in a Dem-controlled legislature, but not undone in a Republican-controlled legislature. For example, Leos, the idea being they are part of the community and neighbors instead of outsiders. Are you still listening? Because I don't know what that means. I figure it would make relations with them to be more civil and less shooty. Can you clarify, Eatmeister? Are you still on? As I'm giving Eatmeister a moment here to maybe clarify, I am going to be wrapping up here. I do appreciate everyone that's listening. Please tell people about this. Contact me through my email, chat room, however you want to communicate with me. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out what it is that you must be saying. But anyway, let me know what you want to talk about, or let me know if I'm not explaining something. This is meant to be a tool that I can communicate with you. I don't purport to be the smartest person in the room. I do believe that I am among the most sensitive to the interests that you want to know. So I really try to communicate for your sake, not for my own sake. So it says, Leos living outside their jurisdictions have us versus them mentality. Making them live where they work might force a change in that mentality. So a Leo, law enforcement officer. Got it. Okay. I still didn't know what a Leo was at first. Now it makes more sense. I think there's validity in that. But again, and this is what you're asking is not a new thing. This has been a discussion before, okay? And I'm willing to have that discussion that law enforcement needs to live in the community that they have the jurisdiction. I'm just saying that it's not as pressing for me as it might be for you or for other people. I can see the advantages in it, but also I don't. Law enforcement is an issue in the United States that is extremely volatile right now, and it appears that we're kind of in two camps. We either trust law enforcement fundamentally or we don't trust law enforcement fundamentally, okay? And then what happens after that, okay? I am a person that fundamentally trusts law enforcement.
Why? Because it's a system that's put in place over years and years, and perhaps even throughout history, to develop where right now. Does it have problems? Absolutely. Are there issues that we have to address with it? Absolutely. But I believe in the system. Now, for people that don't believe in the system or believe that it's fundamentally flawed, then I understand this. This is a check and balance. I can tell you that the far majority of people like St. Paul, I believe, live in St. Paul if they work here. Can't say that across the board. I don't think it's a requirement. Out by us, people that work for the Candy, Ohio Sheriff's Department primarily live in Candy, Ohio. But I certainly understand your point with that. So we can maybe talk about more. We can talk more about that in the future. I'd certainly be willing to do that. But I'm going to wrap up now. I've gone over my 30-minute time limit that I promised everyone. So again, thank you for joining me tonight. I look forward to meeting with you next week. I had a topic that I thought would be important, and I should have written it down because I didn't. But to give you a little bit of a preview, because it was something. Oh, it's going to be my bill. I teased this in the beginning. You're going to want to show up for this next week. We've had a lot of problems with our state agencies misusing taxpayers' funds, and people have been very frustrated about it. I've heard that frustration, and I have written a bill that I believe is going to hold people accountable when there is money that can't be accounted for. This is the biggest problem. We can find out the money that's missing, but we can't seem to blame anyone, and nothing gets fixed because of it. So we will have that as our only subject because I really want to dive into that. Until next week, Yeatmeister, thank you very much for joining me. Everyone else, thank you for joining me. You have a great night. God bless your week, and be sure and go to your local caucus tomorrow night. Thank you. Bye.